Hey, Campfire crew, let's get it on. My Neighbor the Priest by Significant Cut. Around a year ago, I, a 15-year-old female at the time, lived in a smallish house with my single mother. My mom is a very bubbly woman who can start a conversation with anyone and is loved by everyone. I remember one morning hearing her talk to someone outside my bedroom window, just shrugging it off. I eventually went downstairs to ask who she was talking to. She was talking to our new neighbor. She was very sympathetic towards him as she described him as very old. She said around 95-ish. And he lived by himself, a nurse coming to visit him a few times a month. My mom also found out while talking to him he had no family members as they had all passed, so it was really just him. She also mentioned that he was a priest, which I found quite creepy. A few weeks had passed by, and my mom was the kind of woman who cut our new neighbor's grass for him, and would usually strike up a conversation out of pity. I just want to mention that I never saw this man, once I just heard about him from my mom's daily rambling. My house had a window at the top of my stairs that if you looked out of to face the priest's house, as they were almost identically built, there was a window facing right back at ours. Again, I never saw this man, only his dim landing light on. It had been around 3 months since I'd heard from the priest. This one night, I will never forget. Around 1 a.m. I went downstairs to get something to eat, and on my journey back up the stairs and to my bedroom, I looked out the landing window out of just pure instinct. There, on the opposite side, was the old man, his hand gripping the banister as he helped himself up the stairs. The lighting was terrible, but he was very skinny, as old people usually are. Being nosy, I stood there for a moment wanting to get a good look at him. He was hunched over slightly as he struggled to almost carry his own body weight, and I swore I could see the ridges of his spine through his shirt as he hobbled out of view of the window. I'm trying to be mean, but this freaked me the fuck out, and I immediately went to my room trying to get that disturbing image out of my head before I slept. Around a week or two later, the priest's nurse showed up at our door asking if we'd seen him recently, as she was unable to get into his house as it was completely locked and sealed. She hadn't heard from him in over 4 months and was getting concerned for his well-being. I wasn't at home to tell her I'd seen him in the window as I was at school at the time, so my mother just said she hadn't heard from him either. The nurse called the police who broke down his door, and I was just walking home as I reached my house. The police gave another blow to the door with a pole-like thing. I really don't know what it was, but all I do know is that when the door finally came down, the smell that left that house could make anyone's toes curl. The only way I can describe it is when your cat brings home a mouse and it dies under your couch without you knowing. Rushing inside my house, I immediately went up to my room. Peering out of my bedroom window, watching the police enter his house, covering their noses, I don't really remember what happened after that, except when they wheeled his body out in a black bag and into the back of a black van. It was sad I really never gotten to speak to him, and now I felt guilty for being so horrified by his appearance. My mom was also distraught by his passing and was talking to the police outside. The house took weeks to be cleaned out, as when he died all the windows and doors were shut, keeping that smell locked in. When the police left and the street went silent again, I found myself spending more time with my mum downstairs. She has always been religious, so as we spoke she lit a candle for him out of respect and to help him pass into heaven. Bringing up the putrid smell, I asked her what the police had told her, and what she told me has stuck with me since that day. They said he died a few months ago and had been found decomposing in his bed. At first I just shrugged this off when she spoke. I mean, yeah, it was disturbing, but more sad that nobody had noticed his disappearance. But then it clicked. If he died a few months ago, Who was that I saw through the window? I mentioned this to my mum. She also knew I had never seen or spoke to him while he was alive, so she asked me what he looked like. Wispy white hair and a bony hunch. I still remember her face dropping from a blush pink to a pale white. We moved out a month later. I think I'm being stalked by a guy on Grindr, by Just for Hero. I was on Grindr, and I was talking to this guy, and it was pretty casual at first. We were just chatting, and he wanted me to come over and hook up. I told him that I was just in the area hanging with a friend and waiting on another one to get there. He kept pushing the idea and suddenly got closer to me on the app. From being under a mile away to now being under 2,000 feet away. I asked him what he was doing because he somehow got closer, and he said he was just driving around. First red flag I should have picked up on. Eventually, I asked him if he was driving around a graveyard, and he said yes. And one thing led to another, and I agreed to meet him outside of the graveyard entrance and told him it was like a 2-minute walk from my friend's house to the front entrance. So I started walking. I didn't get but a few yards toward the entrance from my friend's house when a car pulled over. It was him, skinnier than what I had seen in his pictures, and he was immediately rubbing himself. He asked if I wanted to take a ride around the block. I told him that I wasn't getting into a stranger's car in a town I wasn't familiar with. Eventually, he drove off down the road. Now, I didn't think to wait till he was all the way down the road to head back inside, which was probably my biggest mistake. This part is speculation, but I'm sure he waited to see what house I went into, if one at all. After a text conversation of him telling me we should have done stuff in the graveyard, I told him that would be disrespectful to the dead. He said he didn't care. Then I tried to send a message saying, well, I care. But the message wasn't sent. So I opened the app again, and he had blocked me. And I thought, whatever, people block others all the time. I got a few more messages from other people, but told them the same thing, that I was at a friend's and I couldn't just pop out. After that, I went to sleep on the couch in their front room, and the next thing I knew, I was awake. But I didn't know why. The sun wasn't shining through the curtains, so I knew it couldn't be that early. My body usually wakes me up around 6 or 7 a.m. So I just lay there for a second, and I heard a knock on the window behind me and to the right of me. My first thought was someone next door doing work on their house. I mean, they were only a few yards away, after all. That was until I heard the knock again. Who would be doing that on a Tuesday morning? I was immediately frightened that it was the guy from last night. But I tried to rationalize. Maybe one of my friends got stuck outside and they needed me to come open the door. But then I heard a knock on the windows from the other side of the sunroom. At that point, I was just freaking out and my mind was racing. My first idea was to grab my phone and check the time. It was 5 a.m. I tried calling my friends as I didn't really want to wake them both up, and the first call didn't get picked up. I decided, fuck it. I took a peek through the window the front door has. Mind you, there was a curtain on it because the windows took up most of the door. But first I checked the deadbolt. It was unlocked, so I attempted to lock it. It was an old brass deadbolt, and quite frankly, I don't know how it worked. So I just decided to peek through the door's windows. Thankfully, no one was outside, just their cat. So I let him in. After that, I said, fuck this, and woke one of them up. There wasn't any more knocking, and I thought to check my phone, and saw that there was a blank profile about 350 feet away. When I refreshed, they were 800 feet away. After I saw that, I didn't know what to think. I frantically searched through my settings trying to find out how to turn my location off. I couldn't find it, so I signed out of the app. Then I went upstairs relaxing with the friend I'd woken up, hoping to not hear a knock at the window. So, creepy guy from Grindr, let's not meet. Strange Halloween by Sarah Beth. Let me preface this by saying I'm by no means a writer, just a domestic engineer living in North Texas. Also, I don't believe in the paranormal, ghosts, demons, aliens, whatever. However, I did have an event happen to me this Halloween I have to admit has me scratching my head. So, it had been a slow trick-or-treat night in our neighborhood that evening, which is pretty odd in and of itself. We usually have kids from different areas dropped off in ours and have a constant parade at our door. That night, I'd say we had no more than 8 or 10 groups of kids come by the entire night. It was about 9:30, and my husband and I were sitting in our family room watching some of those ghost shows based on supposedly actual events. Like I said, I don't believe in that stuff, but I do like a good ghost story now and then. And it was Halloween and all. We hadn't had any activity at the door in over half an hour, and it was getting late, so we decided to turn the porch light off and let our dog Chloe out of her crate. Chloe is an American bulldog and is very docile. We only put her in her crate because we were afraid she'd try to get out and play with all the kids, and I didn't want to have to chase after her down the street. Also, we didn't want her to scare any of the kids because she would look a little intimidating to the younger ones. So I turned the outside light off, let Chloe out, and she followed me back to the couch and laid down at my feet. It was getting close to 10 p.m. when my husband decided he'd had enough fun for the night and was going to go upstairs, take a shower, and get ready for bed. It was a Thursday, and he still had to get up early the next day. My teenage son was out with his friends at a local haunted house and wasn't expected to be back for another hour or so. So that left me alone on the couch with Chloe. Now, just because I don't believe doesn't mean those shows didn't freak me out a bit. And being alone now watching, I'd have to say I was kind of on edge. It wasn't long after I heard the upstairs water for the shower turn on when there came a light knock, knock, knock at the front door. My initial reaction was, what the hell, really? It's almost 10 o'clock, go home. But soon an uneasy feeling came over me. Why the knock? Our doorbell glows, and in the dark and without the porch light on, it would be extra obvious to anyone out there. I paused. I couldn't really just ignore it. Our front door has a big beveled glass panel, and anybody right at the door could see in enough to see that someone was in the family room watching TV. It would be pretty rude for me to just sit there and not answer it. Knock, knock, knock. Again from the door. I glanced down at Chloe, and she was gone. My gaze followed her usual path to the front door, expecting her to be on her way there, as she normally does. But nothing. Chloe wasn't there. I stood up to look around the room better, and I found her, crouching by the back door, looking like she wanted to go out. However, she never asked to go out like that. She always came and licked my hand or put her head on my knee. This was totally out of character for her, and I have to say heightened my anxiety. "Chloe, crate," I said. She just turned back to look at me like, "Oh no, lady, I'm not moving." I yelled up to my husband, but if he was already in the shower, I knew there was no chance of him hearing me. Knock, knock, knock. About that time, a car drove down our street and cast just enough light on the door to where I could see the silhouettes of 2 small children through the glass. I instantly felt relief. It was just some kids, probably a couple of my neighbors on their way back home that wanted to stop by and show me their costume or something. I headed to the door and looked back to make sure Chloe wasn't going to follow. What a great watchdog, I thought to myself as she just sat there. I turned on the porch light when I got to the door, and sure enough, I could see through the glass that it was a couple of pretty small kids. A little late for such young ones, I thought, and I began to wonder about what kind of parents would let their kids run the streets that late at night. I only opened the door enough to where I could block Chloe's escape if she decided to grow some balls, which was only about 2 feet. What struck me immediately as odd was the kids weren't wearing any costumes. They wore normal street clothes. Also, there was no customary trick-or-treat either. I began to feel very uneasy again. It was a girl and a boy. The girl to my left was older, I'd say about 11 or 12. I could tell she was blonde, but I couldn't make out any distinct features as our lights are from high above and on columns at the front of the porch, so most of the light was coming from behind them. I hadn't opened the door wide enough for any light from inside to hit them directly. But the boy did look younger and about a foot shorter, I'd say maybe 8 or 9, and he looked to have light brown hair. The girl very politely spoke up. "Ma'am, can we please come inside and use your phone to call our mom?" As she spoke, something in the pit of my stomach was telling me something was wrong. What kid, even at that age, doesn't have a cell phone of their own these days? I couldn't remember the last time I'd had anybody ask about using my home phone. Hun, don't you have a phone of your own you can call your mom on?" I asked. This is when things got really weird. Both kids turned to look at one another like they were going to say something to one another, but neither spoke. They both turned back to me, and the girl said, "Ma'am, my cell phone battery doesn't have any charge left in it. Can we please come inside and call our mother? We're all alone out here, and my brother is scared." I have to admit, there were 2 competing feelings going on inside me. The first, that of a mother's heart that wanted to help these 2 small children get to their mom. The other, a sinking fear in my gut that was keeping the other feeling at bay. It was then that I noticed that during the short conversation, I had already opened the door a few extra inches, which I was completely unaware of doing. I stopped. "Honey, why don't you give me your mother's number and I can call her myself?" Another pause, and they again looked at one another. After a short moment, they turned back to me, and the girl said, "Ma'am, my little brother has to use your bathroom. Can we please come inside while you call our mom?" And with that last statement, the little girl moved closer toward the door like she was just going to walk in right by me. As she did, she stepped into the light coming from the inside of the house, and I got my first real good look at her. Solid, jet-black eyes. That's all I could see. That motherly instinct I had was gone and replaced by terror I don't think I've ever felt in my life. I could feel every hair on my arms and back of my neck standing at attention. I closed the door to where just my face was able to stick out. The little girl stopped and again pleaded, "Please, ma'am, we're really scared and alone out here. We have to come inside. Please help us." Then, like on cue, both kids began to whimper and cry. That's when my fear took over and I shut and locked the door. "I'll call your mom if you give me the number," I shouted through the door. "But I'm not letting you in my house." I could still see them standing there on the porch, just staring at me through the beveled glass pane. Part of me wanted to run upstairs to my husband, but the bigger part didn't want to lose track of where these kids were. That would have freaked me out even more to not know where they were. After what seemed like forever, but probably was only a few seconds, I decided I'd call my neighbor that lives across the street. As I made my way to the side table by our couch to my phone, I glanced back at the door. Chloe was nowhere to be found. We later found her in the guest room under the bed. When I got to my phone and started to look for my neighbor's contact info, it was only then that the kids stepped away from the door and began to walk to the street. As they did walk, I walked to the door to get a better look to see where they went, still not calling my neighbor. If you get close enough to the glass on my front door, you can see out enough to make out people's shapes, but you can't see much detail. Of course, standing that close to the door would make it pretty obvious to anyone outside looking in. From the door, I could see that the kids were still standing under the street lamp nearest my house, staring at me. As I lifted the phone to my ear after calling, only then did the kids start walking down our street. I met my neighbor out under the lamp once he was out there, but the kids were nowhere to be seen. Like I said, I don't believe in any of that crazy stuff, and had never even heard about black-eyed kids before talking to my friend. What I really think, and what I have to think, is these kids were just out there yanking people's chains on Halloween night. But I will say this for them. Whether they were real or not, they scared the shit out of me and my dog. To the Girl I Was Best Friends With in Elementary School, by Correct Detective. When I was in the 3rd grade, my family and I moved out of state for my dad's job. I started at a new elementary school and made fast friends with a girl I'll call Maria. The two of us were inseparable, but her hobbies weren't something I was used to. This was around 2012, and a big thing she loved was gore. Not just any scary movie gore, but MLP gore. She really introduced me to a very dark side of the internet for an 11-year-old girl. She kept a binder of these gory images and often showed them to me on the bus. First red flag. Second red flag. The boyfriend. Being a literal child at the time, I didn't understand the sudden interest of dating for my peers. But Maria had a boyfriend. It was your typical elementary school relationship, giggling at just holding hands. And it was as short-lived as any elementary school relationship, with him breaking up with her without a care in the world. But she did not take this well. She gathered our little crew in the playground, me being her right-hand man. She laid out a plan, and we were to chase the boyfriend, or ex-boyfriend, I guess, catch him, hold him down, and she would beat him up, I guess? We all didn't want to do that, obviously, but she zeroed in on me. I was her best friend. I was supposed to do this for her. And I, being the stupid 11-year-old I was, told her she was acting insane, and I was just going to go play with the boys. From that point on, we weren't best friends. She was my bully. She harassed me endlessly, little texts constantly popping up on my flip phone, calling me names on the bus, telling authority figures that I had started it. Eventually, this culminated into a sit-down with the principal where we both were scolded and told to play nice. For a bit, everything was calm. Then the art room scissors started going missing. Red flag number 3. I'd been chatting with a friend on the bus when Maria had put a pair of scissors very close to my neck. She laughed it off, and I stayed quiet, just wanting to keep some sort of peace at school. I knew she had stolen them, but I never understood why I never said anything. Things got quiet for a while again. But one day, a day that still haunts me, a day that has put up barriers in me that I shouldn't have had at such a young age. I was taking my usual bus route, arriving early and taking a seat near the back. Maria got on and sat by herself on the opposite side nearer to the front. The bus took off and began the ride to school, and as we were nearing the elementary school, mine and Maria's eyes locked. I'll never forget her smile. She proceeded to pull a kitchen knife from her bag, one of the big ones you keep in a knife block. She flashed it at me before zipping the bag as the bus came to a stop. I remember sitting in my seat as everyone piled off the bus. I don't remember much after that. I do remember freaking out in front of the school. I remember sitting in the office all day, and I remember talking to men in uniforms. I remember reading something I probably shouldn't have. It was a note. Maria was planning to hurt me, and the boy who broke up with her. She was suspended for the rest of the year, and I moved before she came back. I never saw her again. So to the girl I was best friends in elementary school with, let's not meet again. The Girl on the Bridge, submitted by Eli the Unknowing. This happened to me when I was 25. I would like to say that I am, and was, an average guy. Nothing very special about me. The kind of dude you see every day on your way to work, that you might even work with. I do what I need to do, keep my head down, and take care of my family. I've always been like that, and I'm not complaining about my life. After the military, I moved back home and went to school to become a teacher, and then get ready for the real world, whatever that was. I was looking for teaching jobs, but at the time there weren't a lot of them to be had in my area. Now, shit, they can't get anyone to teach. But that's neither here nor there. I finally found some prospects out of state, West Virginia to be exact. Yeah, crack all the jokes you want. Even the stupid hillbillies need to be taught how to read and write. Yuck, yuck, yuck. So I took a chance at a school that had just been built with some new facilities and made my start in teaching. Just prior to my move, I got a Dear John letter from my girlfriend, whom I found out had been cheating on me during my deployment. Yes, folks, Jody is a real guy out there. I had no idea what was going on. And when I came home, my girl stayed with me for 3 more years. Then, when I said I was looking for jobs out of state, she told me that she was in love with this other guy, everything that had happened. She was very sorry, blah, blah, blah. I was heartbroken, but in a way relieved. Had I stayed with her, it just would have been living with a bunch of lies until she eventually probably would have told me everything anyway. But I was still busted up about it. The job started, I immersed myself in it, and I had a decent apartment. But I also had a lot of time to kill on my hands. I decided to get back into running and found a couple of races I could train for and started mapping out a training routine. Most of my runs were after work and before dinner, but sometimes I'd stay late at school grading and such, so on those days the runs had to happen in the evening hours. I had a route that I was particularly fond of. Light traffic, nice atmosphere, just a solid 10K loop. The evening that this happened, I started out later than usual. It was close to 8 o'clock, and the sun was going down. I knew I'd be hoofing it the last 2 miles in the dark. So I had put on my reflective gear and gave it a shot. I recall it had been a rough week, with kids going bonkers for homecoming coming up, and I just needed a run. All was going smoothly, and I was just about to cross a bridge over a pretty high ravine when I saw someone standing on the edge of the bridge about halfway across. As I got closer, I saw it was a woman about my age. When I got right up to her, I saw that she was crying, so I slowed my pace and asked her if everything was all right. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there sobbing, but finally she looked up at me. She had the most amazing blue eyes, really light, almost gray. Her makeup was smudged, and she wiped her tears away with her sleeve, and I fished in my pocket for a Kleenex. I offered it to her, and she took it and said thank you. "Are you okay?" I asked, and she shook her head. She then burst into tears again and said, "He's left me. He's gone, and he's not coming back. It's his child. I've never been with anyone else." I was taken aback. She was beautiful, maybe a little younger than me. I stupidly said, "I'm sorry," not knowing what else to say. "I don't care. It's over. It's all over." And then it sunk into me. Was this woman going to kill herself? Was she planning on jumping over the bridge? I said, "Hey, look, it's not over. Honestly, I just got dumped." Again, me the counselor. I told her what happened to me, and she whispered, "That's awful. It really is. Don't they care? Don't they care what they've done?" We talked for a few minutes, and she started to calm down. Thinking I should get her away from the bridge, I said, "Do you live in town?" And she nodded. I said, "Let me walk you home. Let's just get off this bridge before some nut comes by and knocks us both over." She stood there for a minute, then she put her head down and nodded again. The hell with my run, I thought. This woman needs help. So after a few minutes of silence, I said, "Come on, let's go." She said okay, and we started walking back towards our little village together. She suddenly opened up and told me this whole story about how this guy she was in love with was older, had gotten her pregnant, and then denied it was his. He then gaslighted her, told her she had been cheating on him, and despite her pleas and telling them that she'd only been with him and that she loved him, he just smacked her around and said he was leaving. And that's what he did. He just up and left town with no information on where he was going. They shared a little house together, and through the conversation, she told me that she had no one. Her parents had died a year ago in a car crash, and she didn't have any other family. No brothers or sisters, no grandparents, nobody. She kept saying, "I'm all alone. I'm all alone." I didn't say much as we got back to the village, and she led the way to a shadier part of town. Then she stopped in front of a small, old beat-up house and said, "I'm home. Thank you for walking me." I said the dumb shit all people say. "Hang in there. Everything's going to be fine." I gave her my name and phone number, and she said she'd write it down when she got inside. "What's your name?" I asked, and she said, "Josie." "Well, Josie, call me anytime. Maybe we can get coffee or something." She smiled, well, sort of smiled, and nodded her head again. And like that, she went inside. I saw a light come on, and I stood there for a minute and then jogged back to my apartment. I showered, got some food, and then watched TV with a couple of beers. The next day came and went, and I couldn't stop thinking about Josie. I never got her number, if she even had one. No cell phones, kids. This was 1994. Then, 2 days later, the news broke. A woman had jumped off the bridge to her death. Not even waiting to hear the name, I knew it was Josie. I just knew it, and my thoughts were confirmed. This poor woman had taken her life and the life of the child inside her. Not gonna lie, I was broken up pretty bad, not even knowing her. That night, when I got home, I had a message on my answering machine from the local sheriff. It told me to call them as soon as I could. I was actually going to run on a scheduled run, but I figured I'd better get on the horn right that moment, and I called them. The sheriff transferred me to another sheriff, and he asked me how I knew Josie, and then asked to meet with me immediately. I said sure thing, and I got in my car and drove to the station. The reason that they called me was when that they found her body, she had a piece of paper in her pocket with my phone number on it. They were following up on any lead. I told them everything that had happened the night on the bridge when I met her, and the sheriff wrote everything down. I asked if they knew who this guy in her life was, and he hesitated before saying it was the son of a local pastor. He was kind of this ne'er-do-well that was never really getting anywhere in life. They were also not having any luck finding him. Like Josie said, he just split town. Even his father and mother didn't know where he went. The sheriff thanked me for my time and said they had found a suicide note in her house and apologized for me being mixed up in all this stuff. I just shook my head and went home. I couldn't believe it. She went back and jumped. I did go for a run that night, but not on the bridge. A week later, I did run the bridge route, again around 8 o'clock. I couldn't get Josie out of my head. Who could have? When I came up to the bridge, I saw a figure standing there about halfway across, and I stopped in my tracks, rubbing my eyes. As I moved forward, I saw that it was Josie. My mind twisted. It couldn't be her. No fucking way. It just couldn't. But as I got closer, I saw it was her, and she wasn't crying. She was just standing there looking at me. When I got about 10 feet away from her, she said, "Don't come any closer. You can't. I just wanted to say thank you. I'm not alone anymore." And before I could do or say anything, she threw a leg over the rail of the bridge and disappeared over the side. I rushed to where she had been standing and looked over. There was nothing down at the bottom, just a stream. Whatever I had seen up on the bridge had vanished. I thought it was all a dream and I was about to wake up. But it wasn't a dream. It was real. I was on this bridge, and I had just seen Josie. Or maybe it wasn't real? I mean, she was already dead. It couldn't have been her. I started to convince myself my mind had made the whole thing up, and then I got really scared. I broke into a crazy run all the way back to my apartment, right past her now dark house. I crashed inside on my couch and just sat in the darkness for I don't know how long. I fought with myself trying to figure everything out. I didn't believe in ghosts or the paranormal, but what had just happened? I got up and saw the blinking light on my answering machine and played the messages. One from my mom, one from my ex crying and saying a bunch of crap about getting back together, and then the last one. The beep, then the sound of wind or something, and a very faint voice saying, "I'm not alone. I'm not alone." To this day, I can't explain any of this. I still don't believe in ghosts, but maybe I should. Thursday, July 9th, 2020. By Dylan with Fear. I remember the date and time the scariest night of my life happened to me. It was between the hours of 9 and 10 on Thursday, July 9th, 2020. So this was during the COVID-19 pandemic. This happened in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Around 9, I started doing my laundry, starting with the washing machine, which took around 20 or 30 minutes to wash clothing. With that amount of time to spend, I decided to go outside for a walk around my neighborhood for a nightly breeze while listening to music. I was actually listening to Same Old Story by From Ashes to New on repeat. Just to clarify, I was feeling very down because of how the world just stopped due to the pandemic. With everything closed, a protest that turned into a riot downtown that I was trapped in, and a scandal that transpired at a university I attended. But those are tales for another time. I just couldn't see my friends and girls I had crushes on, and I was even going out to clubs in Pittsburgh's nightlife, especially the South Side. So I was having difficulty adjusting to a worldwide event, trying to cope as well as having patience. Being such an upbeat person with a great attitude in spite of overthinking, like believing the coronavirus spread in Wuhan, China would make it around the world to become a pandemic than it does, has put major emotional distress on me. I was on my way back to the house around 15 minutes before 10 when I was walking through a small highway and no lampposts, so it was creepy going through a dark highway with nothing but trees on both sides and hearing the sounds of crickets chirping. With about a half mile to go, I was on the right side of the road when a white car coming the opposite way slowed down. Then the driver's window lowered, and a man yelled at me to drop my wallet. I was surprised by why he demanded it, but then as I stepped closer to the car, I could see he was holding and pointing something towards me in his hand. A handheld firearm. What made it even scarier is that I didn't have my wallet with me. When I figured out exactly what was going on, I sprinted away back to the house, scared in the back of my mind he was going to shoot at me or take a sharp U-turn to chase me. I was wearing a white sleeveless shirt, long jeans, and waterproof boots, but somehow I ran without tripping. While I was sprinting, I also looked back every few seconds hoping I wouldn't see the same white car. And I didn't. I made it back to my house, sweating and reflecting on what had just happened to me for the first time, being someone who was never in a situation like that before. The only one else at the house was one of my second cousins who was in a gaming room playing video games, unaware of my night walk. The others, my mother and cousin, my second cousin's mother, were out of town that night. Never in my life would I think that I would be a victim of attempted robbery. I wish I got the model of the car, the name, the brand, and most importantly, the license plate to report this guy. But I was too scared to know about that in my fight-or-flight response. I should have still called the police to report it, but being as I was young and feeling down around this time and had never made a police report, I didn't. I know, very selfish of me. To this day, I wish I had just dialed 911. But having an overprotective mother who was out of town that night with my cousin, and my cousin's son being the only one else with me at the house, not even knowing I went outside for a walk while he was playing video games, I just couldn't bring myself to confess this. No one knows about this except a few select friends of mine I called to talk about it to. I know this was a stupid thing I did, but my mind was not well intact with my adjustment to the COVID-19 pandemic. However, this has taught me a lesson, and this should teach you all who have never been in that kind of situation. Never go out in the dark unless you're going somewhere and doing it safely. Maybe with someone you trust. Or if you're looking for time to kill during an indoor chore that takes waiting, do something that doesn't involve going outside. Either way, pandemic or no pandemic, be aware of what happens in situations like this and be safe. Learn from it if you do go out at night. Never go alone. I wonder what would have happened if I didn't figure out what was going on, or if I told him I didn't have my wallet. I believe that if I didn't know what was going on for much longer, chances are I wouldn't be here. The Wendigo by Artisthesia. There's no easy way to tell the tale of facing a Wendigo. I'm not giving my real name, so my name will be Alex due to the severity of this story. On September 13 of 2016, I was driving up the Bighorn Mountains above Buffalo, Wyoming. Just like every trip, I packed accordingly: 2 bottles of water, 6 Nutrigrain bars, and my loaded handgun. I drove up 4 or 5 times per week, never worrying about ghost stories or monsters. And as far as I knew, these mountains were harmless besides predators seldomly seen and weather interference. But something in me changed that day. Instead of going to my usual neck of the woods, I went to a remote campsite known as Hettinger, 15 miles up from town. It's a beautiful place where if you cross the fence, you can climb to a peak and oversee for days. As I was looking over the majestic snow-covered landscape, I saw a tall, slender figure marching through the blanket of powder. Normally, I would think it was just a hunter on the move, but Hettinger was far from any known hunting locations. To this day, I wish I would have packed up and left. I wish I didn't peek through my binoculars, but sometimes securing curiosity was the only safe option. I'll never forget the moment. I peered through the cold glass over the winter plateau, and as I focused my lenses and the figure came into clarity, I dropped behind the rocks. It was looking back at me, as if it could see me. That would be impossible for a human. I was more than 1,000 feet away, and more or less hidden by rocks, and within the tree line. I peeked back up, using only the top of my head to look again. This thing was just standing there, sniffing the air, looking at me. My heart sank, and I couldn't move. I was frozen in fear, and about 200 feet behind me was a small rock cave big enough for me to squeeze into, and deep enough to hide in the dark. I slowly made my way there, inching backwards. I took one last look at this thing, and noticed it was sprinting right towards me. I moved as fast as possible into the hole and tucked in. The moment I made it there, the creature was standing just feet from where I was. Its skin was damp in appearance and gray, It had long hands and fingers to match that turned to dagger-like nails. I cupped my mouth to hide my breathing, which became a challenge due to the cold. But as I moved my hand, a rock tumbled. I looked down at the rock just to look back up and see this thing's cold eyes peering into the hole. It was almost as if it couldn't see me, but it knew something was in there. I stood still as a statue. It reached in, almost grasping my pack, and after what seemed like forever but was probably only 5 minutes, it gave up and took back to sniffing. I waited there in shock, and a daunting weight of fright cast over me every moment that passed. It started getting dark out as night fell, and this thing finally wandered off. I waited until I felt assured to poke my head out. I took a look around and saw nothing. Not even a footprint. I took my time watching my steps to stay quiet and made my way back down to my car. I used my key to unlock it rather than using the button lock, and I got in and sank down and took one last look around. I finally found the courage to crank my car up and began to drive down the trail back to the main highway. As I had just about turned around to get going, I saw it again. It was standing there in the trees, staring at me. I hit the gas and fishtailed the car, but I made it back to the road. As I reached the main road, this thing was in pursuit, and it was keeping up with me. But after a few miles, I looked back, and it was gone. To this day, I haven't been back there, not even to that region of the mountains. Looking it up, I found several myths about the creature that matched the description that I saw, and I read about its origins. I believe it. I believe you should too. Stay safe out there, and always remember, the world is far more vast than we will ever know. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like to hear narrated on my podcast or this channel, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you haven't, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment below. I'd love to hear what you think of the stories, and I respond to everyone there as well. Follow me on social media. Links to that are in the description below. And if you'd like to take your support a step further, a link to my Patreon page is available, as well as my TeePublic storefront. Get yourself some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. Special episode of sorts. Today is my birthday, and I am getting old. Not going anywhere, but man, I'm older than you think. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.